Chapter 1. The stagecoach looked like a turtle that had been kicked over and left to die in the Arizona sun. Marshal Eldridge Sample stepped down from his horse and counted the bullet holes, 7 in the side panel, 3 more through the driver's bench. Blood had dried black on the wooden seat. "Driver took 2 in the chest," said Sheriff Morrison, a thick man who sweated through his shirt despite the October morning. "Passengers said he went for his scattergun first thing." "Passengers hurt?" "Scared mostly. That drummer from St. Louis wet himself, but he ain't saying so." Sample walked around the coach. The strongbox lay open, its metal sides peeled back like a flower. "How much?" "That's the peculiar thing. Payroll money's still there, $300. But there was a leather satchel, papers and such, belonged to that politician Hartwell. That's what the outlaw took." "You talked to Hartwell?" Morrison spat into the dust. "Tried to. Man lit out for Tucson soon as he heard. Said he had urgent business." Sample knelt beside the driver's body. Jake Morrison had been driving stages for 15 years, knew every rock and rabbit hole between Phoenix and Flagstaff. He wouldn't have gone for a gun unless he thought he had the drop on somebody. "Passengers see the robber clear?" "Clear enough. Young fellow, well-dressed, spoke polite, they said. Even tipped his hat to the ladies before he rode off." "Which direction?" "North, toward the mountains." Morrison wiped his face with a bandana that had seen better decades. "There's something else, Marshal. Something you ought to see." They walked 50 yards from the road to where a homestead had stood. Now just charred timber and a stone chimney pointed at the sky like an accusing finger. The smell of burned wood still hung in the air. "When?" Sample asked. "Same night as the robbery, near as we can tell. Family named Kerner lived here, German folks. They're alive, but just barely. Got them staying at the mission in town." Sample kicked at a piece of burned wood. It crumbled to ash. "They see who did it?" "Said it was Apaches, painted faces the whole show. But I've been thinking about that." Morrison scratched his belly. "Kerner told me something strange. Said the Indians spoke English, good English." "Lot of Apaches speak English." "Sure. But how many quote Shakespeare while they're burning your house down?" Sample looked up from the ashes. "Come again?" "That's what Coroner said. The leader, he recited some poem or speech about burning and justice before they lit the place up. Coroner's educated. Says it was from Julius Caesar." Sample walked through the ruins. In the back room, he found melted metal that might have been a strongbox. A family safe, maybe, or something more interesting. "Where's the nearest telegraph office?" "Flagstaff. 2 days' ride." "Send a wire to the territorial marshal's office. Tell them I want everything they got on recent Apache raids." "And Morrison?" Sample mounted his horse. "Find me someone who can track. Best you got." "That'd be Maria Santos, half Apache, works out of the trading post. She's good, but..." "But what?" Morrison looked uncomfortable. "Her husband was a scout. Army killed him last year, said he was leading Apaches to settlements. She ain't got much love for badges." "She know these mountains?" "Born in them." Sample touched his hat brim. "Then she'll do." He rode toward town, but turned in the saddle for one last look at the burned homestead. Shakespeare and ashes. A polite robber who quoted dead Romans and took papers instead of money. Sample had been chasing outlaws for almost 20 years, and this one already felt different. The kind that made you wonder who was really hunting who. Chapter 2. The trading post squatted between the mission and the saloon, like it couldn't make up its mind about salvation or sin. Sample pushed through the door and found himself in a maze of barrels, sacks, and hanging goods that smelled of leather and tobacco. A woman stood behind the counter, her back to him, sorting through a box of cartridges. "You Santos?" She turned around. Apache features, but something else mixed in. Spanish, maybe Mexican. Her hair hung in a single braid down her back, and her hands moved with the quick precision of someone who counted bullets for a living. Depends who's asking. Marshal Sample. Sheriff Morrison said you track. Morrison talks too much. She set down the cartridges and faced him square. You the one hunting Black Bart? News travels fast. News travels, truth crawls. She studied his face like she was reading a map. What makes you think I'd help a federal marshal? Sample pulled out a silver dollar and placed it on the counter. Money. I got money. Then maybe you got reasons. I got those too. Question is what kind? She picked up the dollar, bit it, and set it back down. You know what happened to my husband? Morrison mentioned it. Morrison mentioned that your boys shot him in the back? Said he was leading war parties to white settlements? Her voice stayed level, but her knuckles went white around the edge of the counter. 3 bullets. Close range. You call that justice, Marshal? Sample had heard the report. Army patrol, confused situation, shots fired in darkness. Standard language that meant somebody had screwed up and nobody wanted to talk about it. I wasn't there. No. But you wear the same badge. Different badge. Same government. Sample walked to the window and looked out at the burned homestead in the distance. That family lost everything 2 nights ago. The Kerners. I heard. You hear it was Apaches? She laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. White men see Indians everywhere when things go wrong. Probably burned their own place. Maybe. Sample turned back to face her. Or maybe somebody wanted folks to think it was Apaches. Kind of person who might know Shakespeare. That got her attention. Her eyes narrowed. Shakespeare? Julius Caesar, according to Kerner. Speech about burning and justice. Your people quote Roman plays while they raid. My people quote their grandfathers when they quote anybody. She came around the counter. What else you know about this fire? Same night as the stage robbery. Bart took papers, left the money. Papers worth more than money? Depends what's written on them. She picked up a Henry rifle from behind the counter and checked the action. $10 a day plus expenses. I provide my own horse and ammunition. Deal. Don't shake on it yet, Marshal. I got conditions. Let's hear them. We find evidence this was white men pretending to be Apache. You put that in your report. Real clear, so even politicians can read it. And if it really was Apache, then I'll track them myself. She slung the rifle across her shoulder. Either way, the truth comes out. Sample picked up the silver dollar and flipped it to her. She caught it without looking. One more thing, she said. That stage driver, Jake Morrison. He came through here the day before he got killed. Bought supplies, seemed nervous. Nervous how? The kind of nervous you get when you know somebody's planning to kill you? She opened a drawer and pulled out a piece of paper. He left this for his wife. Asked me to mail it if anything happened to him. Sample took the letter. Jake's handwriting, shaky but clear. Sarah, if you're reading this, it means Hartwell's business caught up with me. The papers he carries ain't worth dying for, but some men don't see it that way. Don't trust nobody in a badge. Love, Jake. Sample folded the letter and put it in his pocket. You read this? I read everything that comes through here. Keeps me alive. Jake knows something about Hartwell? Jake knew lots of things. That's what got him killed. She walked to the door and held it open. We start at first light, Marshal, and we start at that burned house. Sample tipped his hat and walked past her into the street. Behind him, he heard her bar the door with a solid thunk of wood against wood. Tomorrow, he'd find out if Maria Santos tracked as well as she read people. Tonight, he had a letter to think about and a dead man's warning to consider. Chapter 3. Maria crouched beside the ashes of the corner house like she was reading a book written in charcoal and bone. Sample watched her fingers trace patterns in the dirt, following tracks 2 days old. 5 horses, she said, shod, not unshod. Apache don't shoe their ponies. Could have stolen them. Could have, but look at this. She pointed to boot prints near what used to be the front door. Cavalry boots, standard issue. Sample knelt beside her. The prints were clear in the packed earth. Heel marks, toe caps, the whole outline. Army. Or somebody who wants you to think army. She stood and brushed dust from her hands. Your Shakespeare-quoting Apaches wore white man's boots. They worked through the ruins for an hour. Maria moved like water, flowing around obstacles, reading sign that Sample couldn't see. Near the back of the house, she stopped. Marshall. He found her standing over a piece of paper that had somehow survived the fire, scorched around the edges but readable. Sample picked it up and felt his stomach turn cold. Marshall Sample. Atlanta burns prettier than this, don't you think? Some fires serve justice. Some just serve themselves. You'll know the difference when you see it. B.B. Friend of yours? Maria asked. Sample read the note again. Atlanta. 30-year-old memories crawled up his spine like spiders. November 1864. Sherman's march to the sea. Houses burning while families watched from the road with everything they owned tied up in bed sheets. Not exactly. This man seems to know you personal. Seems like. Maria studied his face. You get that look. White men usually start shooting things. What's Atlanta got to do with burned homesteads in Arizona? Sample folded the note and put it in his vest pocket next to Jake's letter. 2 pieces of paper, both pointing at secrets he'd spent 15 years trying to bury. War business? What kind of war business? The killing kind. She waited for more, but Sample walked away from the ruins toward their horses. The mountains rose ahead of them like broken teeth, and somewhere up there Black Bart was probably writing another note, planning another fire. We follow the tracks, Sample said. Tracks lead north, into the high country, hard traveling. Then we better get started. They rode in silence for the first mile. The trail climbed steadily, winding through stands of pine and oak that blocked out most of the sky. Maria rode ahead, stopping every few hundred yards to check sign that Sample couldn't see. At a creek crossing, she dismounted and studied the muddy bank. They watered here yesterday morning. 5 horses, like I said. But there's something else. She pointed to a different set of tracks. Single rider came through later. Different horse, different shoes. Following them. Or meeting them, she remounted. This single rider, he's been through here before. Regular-like. How can you tell? Same horse, same route. See how he cuts wide around that boulder? Most folks ride straight through. This one's got a habit. They climbed higher. The air thinned, and the pines gave way to scrub oak and red rock. Sample felt the weight of the letter in his pocket, felt 30 years pressing down on him like stones. Atlanta. Jesus Christ, Atlanta. Marshall! Maria had stopped again. She pointed to a tree beside the trail where a piece of paper had been nailed to the bark. Looks like your friend left you another message. Sample rode up and pulled the note free. Same careful handwriting. The path to justice is paved with burning houses. Ask the Cherokee about that. You remember the Cherokee, don't you, Marshall? B.B. the Cherokee. Sample closed his eyes and saw faces he'd tried to forget. Families driven from cabins while their homes went up in smoke. Orders were orders, but some orders burned holes in a man's soul. Bad news? Maria asked. Sample crumpled the note. Worse. It's old news. Chapter 4. The Flagstaff Bank sat on the corner of San Francisco Street like a brick fortress, which made the hole blown through its back wall all the more impressive. Sample and Maria stood in the alley behind the building, studying the scattered debris and blackened timber. Dynamite, said Bank President Whitmore, a nervous man who kept checking his pocket watch. Professional job. Knew exactly where to place the charge. When? Sample asked. 3 nights ago. Same night you had that trouble down in Phoenix. Maria knelt beside the blast hole and peered inside. How much did he take? That's the peculiar thing. Whitmore mopped his face with a handkerchief. Left most of the money. Took maybe $200 from the cash drawer, but there was over $3,000 in the vault. What else did he take? Deposit boxes, numbers 12 and 15. Both registered to Territorial Representative Moorcock. Sample wrote the name in his notebook. What was in them? I wouldn't know. Bank policy protects customer privacy. Bank policy don't protect blown-up banks. Sample closed the notebook. What was in the boxes, Whitmore? The banker looked like a man trying to swallow a live toad. Documents, legal papers, land deeds, I believe. You believe? Representative Moorcock's son handles his father's business affairs. Young man very insistent about privacy. Maria stood and brushed dust from her knees. This son got a name? Clayton Moorcock, Jr. Has an office above the haberdashery on LaRue Street. He in town now? Left yesterday morning. Said he had urgent business in Prescott. Sample and Maria exchanged glances. Prescott was the territorial capital, where politicians went when they needed to cover their tracks fast. They walked through the bank's main room. The blast had buckled the floor and cracked 2 windows, but the damage stayed contained to the vault area. Professional work, like Whitmore said. Your robber leave any messages? Sample asked. Funny you should mention that. Whitmore led them to the teller counter and pointed to words carved into the wooden surface with a knife blade. Thieves robbing thieves is justice. Philosophical outlaw, Maria said. Philosophical something. Sample ran his finger along the carved letters. Clean cuts, no hurry. Bart had taken time to make his point clear. Outside on the boardwalk, Maria stopped and looked up at the second-story windows above the haberdashery. Want to have a look at Junior's office? Thought you might. The stairs creaked under their boots. At the top, Sample tried the door handle. Locked, but the wood around the latch looked splintered. Door's been forced, Maria said. Recent, too. Sample pushed it open. The office had been torn apart. Desk drawers hung open, papers scattered across the floor. A safe in the corner stood empty with its door hanging loose. Bart beat us here, Sample said. Maybe. Maria knelt beside the desk and picked up a torn document. Or maybe Junior cleaned out his own office before he ran. Sample gathered papers from the floor. Most were routine. Bills of sale, business correspondence, territorial contracts. But one caught his attention. A surveyor's map showing railroad routes through Apache reservation land with mineral deposits marked in red ink. Look at this. He showed Maria the map. Railroad wants to run tracks right through the middle of the reservation. Can't build on reservation land without government approval. Unless the reservation ain't a reservation anymore. Sample found another document, this one official territorial letterhead. A proposed bill to relocate Apache tribes to smaller reservations further north, opening their current lands for economic development. Maria read over his shoulder. Son of a bitch, they're stealing the whole territory. And making it legal first. Sample folded the documents. Smart way to rob a people. Use law instead of guns. Takes longer, but it's permanent. Maria walked to the window and looked down at the street. Question is, what's Bart planning to do about it? Rob banks. Burn houses. Leave messages carved in wood. Man fights a war with dynamite and Shakespeare quotes. He's got bigger plans than bank robbery. She turned from the window. We need to find out who's financing this railroad scheme. Start with the survey company. Names on the map. Prescott Territorial Survey. Owned by, let me guess, Clayton Moorcock Sr. Maria nodded. Father and son operation. Senator provides the political connections, son handles the dirty work. Sample looked at the ransacked office. Until somebody started robbing their dirty work. Question is whether Bart's fighting them or joining them. What do you think? I think, Maria said, we're about to find out who the real thieves are in this territory. Chapter 5. Maria pointed to horse tracks in the red dirt outside Flagstaff, then mounted without a word. Sample followed her up into the high country, where pine trees blocked the afternoon sun and the air tasted thin and sharp. She rode like she was born on horseback, reading sign that Sample couldn't see. Every few hundred yards she'd stop, study the ground, then move on without explanation. Sample had worked with Army Scouts before. Most talked too much or not at all. Maria fell into the second camp. After 2 hours of climbing, she dismounted near a lightning-split oak and knelt beside what looked like bare rock. "They stopped here," she said. 5 horses like before, but one rider dismounted and walked up that slope. Sample looked where she pointed. Nothing but rocks and scrub brush. "You sure?" "Sure as sunrise." She stood and looked up the slope. "I need to check something. You wait here. I'll come with you." "No." She pulled her rifle from its scabbard. "Some places white men don't go uninvited." She disappeared into the rocks like smoke. Sample waited, listening to his horse crop grass and the wind move through the pines. 20 minutes passed. Then he heard voices. Maria talking to someone in Apache, words he couldn't understand, but tone he could. Respectful. Family talk. She came back down the slope alone, but Sample noticed she'd braided a feather into her hair that hadn't been there before. "Find what you were looking for?" "Found my grandfather." She mounted her horse. "Trail continues north." They rode another mile before Sample spoke again. "Your grandfather live up there?" "Sometimes." "He see our 5 riders?" "He sees everything that moves in these mountains." "What did he tell you?" Maria reined in her horse and faced him. "He told me things a white marshal don't need to know." "Try me." She studied his face for a long moment. "He said one of those 5 riders wasn't white. Apache. Someone who knows the old trails." "Working with Bart?" "Working with somebody." She touched the feather in her hair. "My grandfather also said there's been men in the high country, white men with instruments, measuring things, making maps." "Railroad surveyors?" "Railroad or mining. Hard to tell the difference when they're stealing your land." They found the survey camp an hour later. 5 white canvas tents arranged in a neat row beside a stream. Sample counted 3 men working with surveying equipment while a 4th stood guard with a rifle. "Stay back," Sample told Maria. "Keep the horses quiet." He worked his way through the trees until he could hear conversation. "Need those measurements finished before Moorcock gets back from Prescott," one man was saying. "Give us another week," replied a second voice. "This terrain's harder to map than we thought." "Week's too long. That damn outlaw's got everybody spooked. Moorcock thinks he knows about the mineral deposits. What's he gonna do about it?" "Whatever it takes. Man doesn't get rich in politics by being squeamish." Sample worked his way back to where Maria waited with the horses. "What'd you hear?" she asked. "Enough." He mounted, and they rode back the way they'd come. "They're mapping mineral deposits on Apache land. Moorcock's worried Bart knows about it." "My grandfather could have told you that without all the sneaking around." "Your grandfather talked to a lot of marshals?" "My grandfather don't trust white law any more than I do." She guided her horse around a fallen log. "But he trusts justice." "Same thing, ain't it?" "You tell me, Marshal, is what those surveyors are doing legal?" Sample thought about the documents they'd found in Moorcock's office. Land surveys, territorial legislation, railroad contracts. All legal, all signed by proper authorities. All designed to strip the Apache of everything they had. Legal and right ain't always the same thing. Now you're starting to understand. Maria pulled up her horse. "Trail splits here. Bart went north toward the sacred grounds. The other 4 riders went east, back toward the territorial road." "Sacred grounds?" "Place where my people bury their dead. Where my husband's buried." Her voice went flat. "Place Moorcock wants to run his railroad through." Sample looked up the northern trail. It climbed through rocks and sparse timber toward peaks that scraped the sky. Hard country. The kind of place a man could disappear forever if he knew how. "How far to these grounds?" "Half a day." Maybe more. Maria checked the sun. We camp here tonight. Travel those trails in the dark, we'll end up burying ourselves. You been to these grounds recently? Every month. To talk to my husband's spirit. She dismounted and began unsaddling her horse. And to make sure nobody's disturbed the graves. Anybody ever try? Once. Survey crew last spring. Found them camped right on top of burial sites. Maria pulled her bedroll from behind her saddle. They left real quick when they discovered their water barrels had holes in them. You put holes in them? She smiled for the first time since he'd met her. Water's precious in the high country, Marshal. Man's got to be more careful where he makes camp. Chapter 6. The First National Bank of Tucson looked like it had been built to survive Apache raids and flash floods, which made the neat hole cut through the vault door all the more remarkable. Sample studied the circular opening while Bank President Harrison mopped his brow with a silk handkerchief. "Never seen anything like it," Harrison said. "Not blown, not hammered. Cut clean through with some kind of torch device." Sample ran his finger around the smooth edge of the hole. "When?" "4 nights ago. Night watchman found it Tuesday morning. Strangest thing, though, the robber left most of the money." "How much did he take?" "Maybe $300 from the cash drawer, but he left over $8,000 in bills and coin." Harrison pulled out a leather ledger. Only thing missing from the vault was the contents of Safety Deposit Box 17. "Who owned it?" "Territorial Representative Hartwell. The gentleman who was on that stage you've been investigating." Sample wrote the name in his notebook. Same Hartwell whose papers Bart had stolen from the stage. The pattern was getting clearer. Bart wasn't robbing banks for money. He was collecting evidence. What was in Hartwell's box? Bank policy prevents you from having a hole in your vault." Sample closed the notebook. "What was in the box, Harrison?" The banker looked like a man who'd swallowed something that disagreed with him. "Contracts, mining claims, some correspondence with territorial officials." "You read the correspondence?" "Certainly not. Though I couldn't help but notice the letterhead. Senator Moorcock's office." Sample walked through the bank's main floor. Like the Flagstaff job, the damage stayed contained. Professional work, no unnecessary destruction. At the teller counter, he found Bart's message carved into the wood. "The poor stay poor when rich men steal with laws." "Your robber leave anything else?" "Just that inscription. And this." Harrison handed him a folded note. "Found it nailed to the front door." Sample opened the paper. Bart's careful handwriting. "Marshal. Some men steal with guns, others with legislation. Ask Mr. Harrison about the removal bonds. He remembers when you collected the debts. B.B." The words hit Sample like a fist to the stomach. Removal bonds. After the Trail of Tears, the government had issued bonds to pay for relocation expenses. Someone had to collect payments from Cherokee families who'd been forced to sell their land for pennies on the dollar. "Something wrong, Marshal?" Harrison asked. Sample looked up and saw recognition flickering in the banker's eyes. "You know me, don't you?" That is, your name seems familiar." "From where?" Harrison twisted his handkerchief. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately?" They went to Harrison's office, a wood-paneled room that smelled of cigars and old money. Harrison closed the door and walked to his desk like a man heading to his own hanging. "I was a clerk in Georgia, back in '68. "You remember the debt collections?" "I remember everything about that year." Harrison sat down heavily. "Including the federal officers who came to collect payment on the relocation bonds." "And?" "You were one of them, Marshal. You and that unit of yours made quite an impression on the families." Sample remembered. Going house to house with legal papers, demanding payment for debts the people never owed. Families who'd already lost everything, forced to sign over their last possessions to pay for their own exile. "We followed orders." "Oh, yes. Very thoroughly." Harrison's voice carried 30 years of buried resentment. "That one family. The Ridges. You collected their debt personally. They refused to pay. They had nothing left to pay with. So you took their horses, their wagon, their winter food stores. Harrison stood up, left them to walk to Oklahoma in the snow. Sample remembered the Ridge family. Old man, his daughter, 2 grandchildren. They'd begged him to leave them their horses for the journey. He'd taken them anyway. Orders were orders. The daughter. What happened to her? Died on the trail. Pneumonia. The old man, too. Harrison walked to his window. But those grandchildren made it to Indian territory. Boy and a girl. What were their names? Don't rightly recall the boy's name, but the girl was called Maria. The room went cold. Sample felt something twist in his chest like a knife blade turning. Maria Ridge. That's right. Pretty little thing. Maybe 12 years old when you took their horses? Harrison turned from the window. Though I heard she married later. Took her husband's name. Santos, I believe it was. Sample walked out of the bank without another word. On the street, he found Maria watering the horses at a public trough. She looked up when he approached, and for the first time he saw something familiar in her face. The eyes of a 12-year-old girl watching federal marshals take away her family's last hope. "Find out what you needed to know?" she asked. "Yeah," Sample said. "I did." Chapter 7, Georgia, November 1864. Captain Eldridge Sample watched smoke rise from what used to be Milledgeville, while his regiment waited for orders. Sherman's march to the sea had turned Georgia into a corridor of ashes, and Sample's company had burned their share of towns between Atlanta and here. "Next target's 5 miles south," said Lieutenant Morrison, pointing at a cluster of buildings in the valley below. "Little place called Cedar Grove. Maybe 30 families." Sample studied the town through his field glasses. White houses, a church steeple, fields that had been harvested and left neat for winter. The kind of place where decent folks tried to live quiet lives while the world burned around them. "Military targets?" Sample asked. "Grain mill, blacksmith shop. Rest is just houses." "Civilians?" "Mostly women and children. Men are all off with Johnston's army or dead already." Sample lowered his glasses. Sherman's orders were clear. Destroy everything that could support Confederate forces. Food, shelter, transportation. Make Georgia howl. But Sample had been making Georgia howl for 3 months, and the howling was starting to sound like his own voice. "Mount up," he told his men. They rode into Cedar Grove at midday. The townspeople came out of their houses to watch, women in worn dresses, children peering from behind their mothers' skirts, old men too feeble for military service. Sample had seen the same faces in 20 other towns, fear mixed with resignation. "You know what we're here for," Sample announced. "Official military supplies will be confiscated, civilian property will be destroyed to prevent military use." "Please," said an older woman stepping forward. "We ain't got nothing to do with this war, just let us be." "Can't do that, ma'am." Sample's men spread through the town with practiced efficiency. Torched the grain mill first, then the blacksmith shop. Houses came next, families given 10 minutes to gather what they could carry before the flames started. Near the church, Sample found a young woman loading children into a wagon. She looked maybe 25, with dark hair and the kind of face that reminded him of someone, though he couldn't place who. 2 small children clung to her skirts while she tried to calm a crying baby. "Ma'am," Sample said, "you need to move that wagon away from the church." "Where am I supposed to go? You're burning everything." "That ain't my problem." She looked at him with dark eyes that held more hurt than anger. "Those children got family in Savannah. I'm trying to get them there before winter." "Roads are dangerous. Confederate raiders." "More dangerous than staying here with y'all burning everything we got?" Sample looked at the children. The youngest couldn't be more than 3 years old, staring at federal soldiers with wide, frightened eyes. Behind them, smoke was already rising from the first houses. "You got an hour before we torch the church," Sample said. "Use it." Lieutenant Morrison approached with a torch in his hand. "Captain, ready for the church?" Sample watched the woman trying to load crying children into a wagon while her world burned around her. The baby wouldn't stop screaming, and the older children kept asking questions she couldn't answer. "Torch it," Sample said. He rode away before the flames reached the steeple, but he could hear the woman calling after his regiment, begging them to leave something standing, somewhere her children could shelter for the night. Sample never looked back, but 20 years later, he could still hear that baby crying and see those haunting eyes staring at him with hurt that federal uniforms couldn't justify. In his hotel room in Tucson, 30 years after Sherman's march, Sample woke from dreams of burning churches and crying children. Outside his window, the desert stretched away toward mountains where another woman with dark eyes was leading him toward a reckoning he'd spent 3 decades trying to avoid. Some ghosts never stopped following,